I'm with Edge Impulse, and I've been there for a couple of years now, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do later, but we do a lot of work with healthcare companies trying to deploy AI into the real world. So what is AI and why is it big right now? Before, if you want to build a system or a product that can give someone an insight or do something, generally what you do is you start with some data, you apply some rules to that data, write some code, and you get an outcome. And then you go back and adapt those rules to then fit that new data. The new paradigm, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, is that actually what you want to start with is the outcome that you want. And you apply the data to that outcome using AI and machine learning, and what you get are the rules that can then give you that insight. And this is really important to understand because it really changes the way that you need to think about solving problems, particularly in a healthcare setting. So what makes healthcare different to other AI applications? You know, we work with industrial companies doing end-of-line inspection, product companies building smart cat feeders, but AI in healthcare is a whole different kettle of fish. Why is that? Well, it's because the stakes are a lot higher. You're dealing with really privileged information about humans, and the outcomes that you're generating are going to really impact how that person is cared for. So there are a couple of things that you need to be really careful of when you're developing AI for a healthcare setting. One of them is accuracy. AI models generally can be really good when they're restricted down, but sometimes they get things wrong. I mean, you look at this, and which of these is a cupcake and which of them's a dog? Which of them's a mop and which of them's a dog? To us, we can all see that. But when you're training an AI model, or when you're using things like generative AI, you have to be really careful about the reliability and how you develop that model so that it can be trusted in the field. And then when we look at generative AI, I'm sure you've used Google recently and you've seen some of the kind of crazy things it comes up with. You know, how do I stop cheese sticking to my pizza? You can add an 1/8 cup of non-toxic glue to the sauce. You know, this sort of stuff is quite scary, really, because generative AI has all of this power and all of this knowledge, but it's also trying to fit whatever you feed it. And if it doesn't have the knowledge imbued inside of it to actually give you a useful answer, then it will just give something that kind of looks okay. And kind of looks okay is not enough when you're dealing with things like cancer diagnoses. So how do we improve and solve these problems? One of them is about explainability. AI is generally pretty obfuscated and difficult to understand. And there's a bunch of stuff that we do at Edge Impulse to kind of make AI a little bit simpler and understand its context and really restrict it down so that it is a bit more explainable. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But that's one of the real challenges that we're seeing in AI at the moment. So everything starts with data, and there's actually a few things that are really difficult about healthcare data in particular when you're training a model. Healthcare data is highly complex. It involves lots of different sources of data. Talk about lab results, talk about health wearables, things that you're wearing on your body right now. You might be logging some healthcare data, your heart rate, but it also includes unstructured data, things like doctor's notes. All things that are coming from the mind of a human are really, really difficult to categorize and look after. The next thing is data quality is really difficult with healthcare. I mean, I'm sure you've had scenarios where you've moved GP surgeries and you lose all of your patient data from before, or it's in a different format and it doesn't quite look right. A lot of human error involved in healthcare data. And all of that really impacts those earlier things about AI reliability, because AI really relies on high quality data and data that is really well structured. And yeah, we talked about the interoperability thing. You know, different systems for different vendors. It can be an absolute minefield. And then with healthcare, the other big thing is the ethical concerns and bias. So when you're looking at the outcome of an AI model in healthcare, you're looking at someone's real health and their own body being impacted by the outcome of that model. So it's really important that the AI model that you train is conscious of bias. You know, for example, if I train a model purely on my own data to, a simple use case, detect a keyword, detect me saying the word TechX. If I record that in my bedroom and I say TechX 100 times and test that model in my bedroom on myself, I go, great, it works perfectly. But if I then hand it to my colleague, Sergi, who's not here today, he's Spanish, he speaks with a completely different accent. It's not going to work for him. The same is true for these complex AI and healthcare data models, where you need to be really conscious of the environment in which that model is going to be run and who it's going to be run on, and try and figure out ways to either encapsulate that person's kind of data into the model, or restrict down the use case enough that it's simple enough that it will work for anyone. And then there's consent and data ownership. To train an AI model, you need data that's labeled, and often that data can be quite sensitive. It can be attached to humans, and you don't want to lose that data, and you want to be really careful about the security of it. So how do you obfuscate data before training? How do you look at it, and how it should be used for AI training, and what data you can use is really important to think about. So one of the big things that we think about at Edge Impulse is, why do we want to put these models not in the cloud once you've trained them, but actually onto edge devices themselves? And there's a bunch of different benefits to this that we see across industry, but in healthcare, there are a couple that are really important. If you take a model that you've trained and run it directly on a device, there's a bunch of benefits. One of them is privacy. You're ingesting a bunch of sensitive data, say an image of a person or heart rate data about that person. If you process all of that data at the point that it's collected, then it never has to leave that device. And only the insight that you want to gain from that device leaves the device. It's much more secure just by design. Then there's reliability. You want your healthcare system to work whatever the scenario. You don't want the network to go down and then you not be able to do the diagnosis that you need, or a health wearable that's sending data out only when it has network connection, for example, for blood glucose monitoring. You need that to happen all the time, consistently. So running at the point of data collection really allows that to happen. So what is Edge Impulse? At Edge Impulse, we develop a platform that helps you take any sensor data, train an AI model to develop an insight, and then the clever thing is that we package up that model that you've trained small enough to fit onto the tiniest of microcontrollers. I'm wearing a smart ring, which isn't going to come off my finger now, that's running a Cortex M4 ARM chip, and this chip can run an AI model on it for a healthcare use case. We're really talking super, super low power use cases. We also cover all the way up to kind of high-end GPUs at the edge as well for things like object detection and image models. So we optimize the model to fit onto tiny devices. And that allows us to really go and work with a huge range of different customers. So what is the ML development process, the AI development process? This is the process we follow with all customers, not just healthcare customers, industry as well. And it's all about starting with good quality data. So you need to go out, choose your use case, and go and collect some data from a sensor that is to do with that use case. So say you are doing activity tracking, you need to go and collect a bunch of data of maybe an accelerometer mounted on someone's wrist over a really wide range of people to go and create a model to detect what kind of activity that person's doing. Then the next steps really are about, firstly, digital signal processing. Might sound like a complex part of the process, but it's very simple. It's about extracting the useful information from the raw data that you've collected before you then turn it into the machine learning model so that you can reduce the size of that model. Then we help you with the model development. We have a really simple UI that makes it really easy to go and create time series and image-based machine learning models for any engineer to use. Our whole point is to democratize AI in the sense that we want anyone with engineering skill set and a particular set of skills around their use case, subject matter expertise, to be able to take that data that they've collected and turn it into a model really quickly. The second last thing is about testing. It's really important that you test your model robustly and thoroughly before it then goes out into production. So we have a suite of tools that help you do that. And the final thing is that special source. How do we get that model from something that's big and runs in the cloud to be really small and fit on something as small as a smart ring? And that's really where we help. And this is really what the platform looks like. We integrate with a bunch of different data collection tools, things like cloud buckets, things like data science tools as well. If you have data scientists, we can integrate with those. And then on the export side, we have a bunch of different options for deploying your model as well. And everything I just talked about lives in the middle. So we're really the platform for helping you develop any kind of sensor-based use case, and particularly for healthcare, we've done a load of work to make it really work well for those sensor-based use cases where you're looking at humans and how humans interact. So let's talk about some of our kind of customers and what we're doing out in the industry right now with healthcare. So we have 170,000 developers on the platform, and that's growing every day, and they've built over 440,000 different machine learning models. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be a QR code. You can scan it and sign up and have a go for free today. We offer the platform for free for everyone to use and start to develop those early use cases. But the sorts of kind of sensors we're using out in the healthcare field at the moment, ECG, PPG, things for looking at heart rate, skin, temperature, things like that, motion, accelerometers, and air quality is another big one in healthcare at the moment. And there's kind of verticals that we're looking at in healthcare are things like life quality, so sleep tracking, performance, looking at activity in particular, safety. We've got a use case I'll talk about in a little bit about heat exhaustion in firefighters. And then healthcare in general in terms of looking after patients in the healthcare setting. We have a bunch of customers doing some really innovative stuff in terms of elderly care in particular, things like fall detection. Some of our customers down there you might be familiar with. Ultrahuman are putting rings into the market with our algorithms on right now. Polar, another customer you may be familiar with, builds sports watches for Olympic athletes. They're using our platform to help train new models to improve the performance of athletes. And then I'll talk about a couple more in a second. So No Labs, this is one of my favorite use cases for Edge AI. This is one of the kind of real vanguard use cases that we're seeing out in the field. No Labs are developing a device for non-invasive blood glucose monitoring. So without needing to prick the skin, it's just a set of cheap time series sensors that you put your hand over the top of, and then they're using AI to correlate that data to what would be a pinprick of blood for a glucose reading. And being able to do that with Edge AI means they can use much cheaper sensors and create a device that is super low cost, but has the same impact without you needing to take blood every day or every hour. And that's going to be huge in terms of impact when it comes to market. They were able to do that using the tools that we provided to help them kind of wrangle that time series data, create a really robust and large data set, and then deploy that model to a really tiny device. Hive for another interesting use case. They've collected hundreds of thousands of hours of coughing data. This started during COVID, and they've developed a data set that has over 85,000 coughs and 3 million non-cough sounds that allow them to diagnose different conditions directly from a single cough, directly on the device. So this model runs on a smartwatch or directly on your smartphone and is able to tell you what kind of illness you might have just based on the sound of your cough. That's the kind of innovation that you can do when you start to work at the edge. So how do you get there? This is a solutions architecture diagram that I often use with my healthcare customers as a solutions engineer for helping them understand what it's going to take to get from beginning to production with an Edge AI use case. And this really applies to cloud use cases as well, where you want to generate healthcare data. The first thing you really need to go to market, and this is particular for healthcare because there's a bunch of regulation and a bunch of kind of standards around how you validate that your model works in the field. You need to have really a clinical study where you've got some kind of researcher who can validate the data, some kind of device where you're collecting data from that's going to be similar to the device that you deploy to, a reference wearable device, and then you need some reference clinical data to back it up. So in No Labs' case, they've got a bunch of practitioners, researchers collecting real blood glucose data from blood, and they have their special wearable device with a bunch of different sensors. They're collecting all of this correlated data together. Then you need to go and aggregate that data all together in the cloud. That's something that we can help with. Validate that that data is ready to be used for machine learning, then prepare it into a format that is kind of your research data store ready to go. And then the model development step is very simple. You know, we have the tools that help you extract the right features, develop and train your model, and then create that deployment package. And then you want to go and test it in the field. Field testing is a huge part of how you develop a new AI device, especially in healthcare. Test it in the field, and then iterate. So you want to go and test, validate that it works, go back to the start, collect more data. It's always going to be an iterative process. So let's talk about some of those steps and what it really means. Data really is everything. I think I've emphasized this quite a lot, but in all kinds of AI, and particularly in healthcare, the quality of your data really defines the outcome of your model. Data is really expensive to acquire and even more expensive to get a ground truth for. So in No Labs' case, it's really expensive to collect blood from people and get that ground source truth for their own sensor. You have to run clinical trials. There's lots of stuff that we can help you with in terms of synthesizing data, using generative AI to clean up data, things like that, that we're working on this year, and we're happy to have a chat with you at our booth about. This is something I want to show you that's really at the vanguard of what we're doing. This is an explainability tool called GradCam that we've recently done a blog post on. One of the really interesting things about AI, and hopefully it gives you an insight into some of the caveats and pitfalls that there might be. So it's hard to see, but there's kind of a heat map over these images of bones. And this is an anomaly detection model for detecting fractures in bones. And what this heat map is showing you is where the AI model is focusing when it's doing that classification. And this is a really good data set because you can see that there's heat maps over the areas of the bone which there might be fractures. And there's nowhere else in the image. That's a good data set. But this is what a bad data set or a misleading data set could look like. This is a pneumonia detector, and when we run the GradCam over it, it's actually only focusing on the text up in the top left and right of the image, rather than anything about this giant tumor in the lungs. And what that tells you, and you wouldn't know when you go and test that model, it would run correctly because actually all of the pneumonia data is encoded in the image up here. So it's completely useless as a model in the real world. It's only useful if that text is there. That's the sort of thing that you really need to understand when working with AI in terms of explainability. You need to understand these tools for getting an idea of what actually this neural network is looking at, rather than just putting data in and hoping for the best. I think this is particularly prescient. Yesterday I saw this news article, and it was all over the news, about the NHS launching a cancer diagnosis system based on vision. It's literally exactly the same use cases that we're looking at here, classifying X-rays to detect tumors. I hope they're looking at the explainability side of this, because when you deploy this stuff in real life, it's really, really important that you understand the ramifications of deploying a bad model and understanding how you can explain that to regulators in the event of a failure. So something to food for thought there. One of the other things that we work on quite a lot is specialized algorithms for healthcare. So this is our HRV DSP algorithm. It's our own in-house algorithm which converts the raw sensor data on something like a smart ring or a smart watch into super reliable heart rate variability data. This is one of the core pieces of most of your smartwatches that do activity classification, stress classification, and sleep classification. These are the sorts of things that we're expert in that can be building blocks to help you build the next great healthcare AI product. So I want to sort of finish on deployment and what the future looks like for edge AI in general. I think we're seeing a huge shift in the availability of hardware as well as the types of models that are available. So right now we can run pretty much these sorts of use cases on these sorts of devices. We're talking really, really small memory requirements to run even image classification, 256 kilobytes. But there's a new frontier coming down the line, and I'm sure you can predict what it's going to be. It's Gen AI. We see that Gen AI in the next year or two is going to start to become available on higher-end edge hardware directly at the edge. Now, this is really exciting, particularly in the vision language model space, because it suddenly means that the data requirements to get an outcome in the field are far reduced, because all you need to do is write a prompt. But actually, it's a word of caution for you, because where this is going to become really, really important is how do we restrict the outputs and validate and test those large language models that can do anything so that we can trust them in something like a healthcare setting. You know, if you ask an LLM, what is this tumor, and it just gives you a random answer and you can't validate whether or not it's correct, then it's a totally useless use case. I'll leave you with this example that I had a play with last week. I think that the real use of VLMs at the edge is going to be in cascading models. So looking at something like an accelerometer has detected someone's fallen over, and then we can run a large language model to add context to that classification to say, okay, before we send any information to the emergency services, can we tell them exactly where in the room they've fallen over? Is there anything else that we need to be concerned about in this environment? These are the sorts of assistant roles that can be a lot more safe to use for things like generative AI than getting them to do the actual classification themselves. So it's always still going to be about validating the core use case with real data, but then we can add extra intelligence to these systems using things like generative AI. So that's it from me. I think I've just hit the mark on 1 minute over. If you want to come and have a go with our platform, scan this QR code. You can sign up for free. And come and find us at booth 152 just over there. We can have a chat if you have any particular use cases you want to discuss. But hopefully that was an interesting talk about sort of the future of AI in healthcare and how that relates to the edge. Thanks very much. I've been Jim. Feel free to find me afterwards if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.